Hi guys, Anthony here with another episode of DM's Journal for out of the Abyss D&D 5th edition campaign book. I am your DM, Anthony, and today I have a pretty cool little update. We were 2 weeks without a play session because Easter, I think, was the prior weekend. But this Sunday we played. We had a 4-person party. The only person who couldn't make it was our turtle monk, Uta. He was unable to make it last night, or sorry, not last night, it's Tuesday today, 2 nights before on Sunday. But we did have our bard, our half-elf bard Ken. We had our orc barbarian by the name of Bard. We had our half-elf warlock Colby, and we also had... Who do we also have? Oh, of course, our Paladin, Sir Robert. So everyone was, we had enough to kind of go ahead with our play session. If you recall, we ended off last time with our party in the audience of a adult red dragon in the city of Gracklstook. They were brought to see the Forge Father, who they found out was a red dragon by the name of Themberchode, or Themberchode, or whatever it is. And basically, that's where we had to end off. It was like, okay, you've met this dragon, and he wants to talk to you, and we pressed pause, and then we just resumed there on Sunday. And so ultimately, it was a really great session. There was some combat, and the combat was dicey as always, which sometimes the players complain about, but I think ultimately it's a good thing. I don't want the combats to ever feel like they're too easy, and that's definitely not been the case. So there was a little bit of combat, but there was a lot of great role play, which I was very happy to see, and everyone did a good job of it. So without further ado, this is essentially how our last play session went down. So we went back into the room with the dragon, and the dragon basically told all of his servants to just go away. He wanted to speak to these adventurers in private, and that if he sensed any invisible watchers present, he'd kill them himself, basically. So all the guys were like, oh, okay, we're leaving, and they kind of bowed their way out. And the dragon, who the players very wisely showed the respect that the dragon felt that he was due, had a conversation with them, and basically said, well, the Keepers of the Flame are always keeping an eye out for good mercenaries, especially because there's a situation that's come up. There's a red dragon egg that they had in their possession that was actually stolen. And he says, but, the thing is that I think that these people, I get the sense that they're keeping something from me, and I don't like that. So all I want to ask of you guys, after he kind of said, tell me about yourselves and who you are and how you wound up in the Underdark, because he finds the stories of such mere mortals to be very amusing, is he said, what I want you to do is act as my agents. Just do whatever the Keepers of the Flame want you to do, but report to me before you report to them and keep me informed of what's going on. And the players were like, yeah, that's something that we can do for you. What's in it for us? And he basically says, oh, you'll have my protection in any way that you need it. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. So they took that job and kind of got out of there as quickly as possible. The red dragon was arrogant enough to not even really wait for a response, because after all, who would refuse such an offer from him? So it was kind of a scenario of, will you do this for me? Okay, great, you're going to do this for me. And the characters left, and upon leaving, the kind of Keepers of the Flame, this organization or holy order or cult or whatever you might call it, that tends to the dragon, basically said, so what did the dragon want? And he said, oh, like they just wanted to talk to us, and that was it. And they were like, yeah, he's been kind of weird lately. And then they explained the situation, like, we lost this dragon egg, and here's why that's important. And what they essentially described was that there's a process in Gracklstook. Gracklstook is this massive forge city that has all these forges going all the time, creating all this weapons and armor, and that's their main industry. And the way they're able to do that is they have a resident red dragon the Wyrmsmith of Gracklestugh, that basically keeps the fires going insanely hot all the time by doing basically flybys to keep everything stoked. So he said, but look, so the way that we do this is that we have a red dragon, we raise this red dragon, and we have psionic capabilities that we use to basically keep the dragon in check and manipulate its behavior so that it doesn't kind of get out of hand or go on a rampage or decide that he doesn't want to cooperate anymore. But the shtick is that we can only do this for so long before that red dragon grows too powerful or figures out what's going on and kind of, then we've got big trouble. So the idea is that we do this to a certain point, and when that point comes along, we kill this dragon, and by that point we'll have another red dragon egg waiting in the wings to replace the one that we're getting rid of. And the problem is now that the dragon egg has been stolen by the Grey Ghosts, which are basically like this shadowy thieves guild that exists in the city of Gracklestugh. And the priest goes on to say, we feel that there's been a tear in reality and that there's some terrible magics going on in the Whorlstone Tunnels under the city where we believe the Grey Ghost to reside and to have the egg and yada, yada, yada. So will you go get this egg back for us? And the characters do a little bit of negotiating, the players do a little bit of negotiating, and they say, yeah, okay, we'll do that for you. And they don't say anything about what the Red Dragon Themberchode has told them. So they're granted additional badges of honor, or badges of office, I should say, these gold seals with images of the dragon's head on it to basically say you're on the Keeper of the Flame business. So, you shouldn't be that bothered by anyone and doing what you're doing. Should give you a little more access running around town to areas where foreigners aren't supposed to go. So they say, great. He basically said, the only lead I have for you is that we believe there is a Grey Ghost messenger or courier, this Darrow by the name of Droki, and that might be where to start. Now this, if you recall, is the second time that the characters have heard this guy's name before. When they were in the offices of Erde Blackskull, the captain of the Stone Guard, she said the same thing, like, I believe something weird's going on with this Droki fellow, and he evades all our guards, invisible or not, so you need to get your hands on him. So now the party's motivated to kind of say, okay, well, let's see what's going on with this Droki guy, and that'll kill a few birds with one stone for us. So they learn that he's usually seen like in the Docks district with the Blade Bazaar kind of thing, the main market area. So they say, okay, well, let's go that way. Now upon getting to the docks area, they notice that there's a merchant on the edge of a dock, and all of a sudden two Duergar appear out of thin air, like they become visible from invisible, and they all of a sudden have these glowing swords, these white energy swords in their hands kind of thing, and they just start killing this guy. And the characters are like, oh geez, we should stop that, because by and large we're a good party. So they jump in and they fight off these two assassins. They actually kill one of them, and in trying to kind of get information out of him, the assassin just kills himself, and his blade disappears, and they're masked and hooded, and the guards come over. But before the guards come over, they say, like, what was going on? Why were they trying to kill you? And this guy who introduces himself as Wurz Salt Baron, is a Duergar merchant, says, I have no idea, and I have to get out of here. I need to get away from this scene. The guards will be here soon. If you want to talk more, meet me at the Shattered Spire, which is this cool little bar that's in the Docks district. And he takes off. So the guards show up and they do some questioning, but ultimately the characters kind of flash their badges and they're like, look, this guy, there was these guys and they were assassins, and the guards look at them and like, yeah, these look like Grey Ghosts. And they're like, oh, so this is what the Grey Ghosts are. But ultimately, they were allowed to just kind of walk away because of their badges of office that had been given to them. So they say, well, we're in the Dock District anyways. Why don't we check out this Shattered Spire place before we go into the market and look for Droki? So they agree on that, and they go to the Shattered Spire, which is basically this giant stalagmite, whichever one comes out of the ground, that's like 40 feet off a shore coming out of the Dark Lake. The top half of it is broken, but there's not an inn, but just like a pub that's been built into the base of this thing. And they go in, and it's not like the previous bar that they were in that was meant for foreigners. This is mainly Duergar, a few other people, but it's basically a gray dwarf bar. And they go in there, and they notice more strange happenings, like two guys who are talking to each other just all of a sudden get into this fisticuff brawl, and eventually it's broken up, and the two don't even remember why they started fighting with each other. So they continue to notice all these oddities around the city, and this was just another one of them. And they easily spot this Salt Baron guy who says, look, I guess I owe you a debt. I mean, you saved my life. So he rewarded each of the characters with like an obsidian stone worth 10 gold apiece or something like that. And then he said, look, they basically said, well, why were those guys after you again? And he says, no, I honestly have no idea. And the character's like, I think this guy's lying. So they did an insight check, and one of the characters rolled high enough that I was like, yeah, he seems to be holding back some information. And when they pressed him, he was like, well, I don't know. I mean, the only reason I could imagine is that, there is a deep gnome in the city of Blingdenstone by the name of Kazoo that I do business with selling these gems. And maybe they don't like that. I don't know. But speaking of, you guys are capable. I have the next shipment. Would you mind taking these off my hands and delivering them to this deep gnome in Blingdenstone should you go there, And, can you make that a destination? And the characters, I don't know, I guess maybe they were feeling too overwhelmed with additional side quests because there are a few that they're working on. They basically said, like, no, this seems super illegal and we don't want anything to do with this. And the guy pretty much said, then fine, then I'll find someone else. Go away. I've rewarded you now. So at that point, they left. And then they went to the Blade Bazaar, and they did spot Droki after doing some perception checks and whatnot. And so this was what happened. This was the plan of attack. Not so much a plan, just an attack. Is the Paladin says, okay, I see him, and I cast Sleep. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. This is not what I had planned, but let's see where this goes. So he casts Sleep, and he rolls up his hit die pool of, I think he wound up getting 28 total. And he said, okay, this Droki guy, is his hit point pool 28 or less? And I looked at it, and no, it wasn't. So he said, oh. So not only does the spell fail to put him to sleep, but a few people around him or a person around him falls asleep because it's like an area effect spell, and it will affect that many hit points worth of stuff. So a few people just like fall asleep and drop around him, and he's like, what? And he looks up and he sees the Paladin and the party, which stick out like sore thumbs because they're surfacers, they're like the only surfacers there. And he kind of goes, ooh, and he clicks his heels together 3 times and takes off at like a weird speed, like super fast. So then this chase starts, and they're running after him, and a couple of the characters find like greasy stones and slip on them, because we use the chase mechanics from the DM's guide. So there were a few kind of complications that arose, but ultimately he was going too fast, and he was too small, and it was a crowded area, and he slipped away. But the barbarian is proficient in survival, and in the direction he was running and the tracking they were doing, they could reasonably figure out that he was heading towards what's called the West Cleft District. And the West Cleft District and the East Cleft District are basically the 2 areas of town that have been settled by the now liberated Darrow population, which used to all just be slaves. So the West Cleft is where they came from, and it is like very slummy, very ghetto style living. And the East Cleft, the more recently settled spot after they became liberated, is not quite as bad. But the West Cleft is where they were going. So again, they go in, and immediately, I give them the description. It basically says that like it's terrible, it smells awful, it's super overcrowded, and all the Darrow are crazy. Like that's just what they are. Like Darrow are naturally just kind of insane, and so they're screaming at each other and muttering to themselves, and everyone who looks at them just hates them for whatever reason. They're just hateful creatures. So the Paladin says, okay, I take Dawnbringer out. That was the fancy magic sword he got a couple sessions ago. And he says, and I ignite it. And so now sunlight pours out because I can hardly see in this dim lighting. I'm a human. I say, okay. And now all those Darrow, because they're creatures of the Underdark, have an aversion to sunlight. So they just get mobbed. I mean, that's what it was. These guys hate them already. All they were looking for was an excuse. So they get mobbed by these Darrow. And Ken basically says, I'm out of here. And he runs off. He just basically flees the fight to leave the way that they came, like to get out of the West Cleft District. And the Barbarian grabs the Warlock and slings him over his shoulder and says, I run as well. And the Paladin, does a little bit of fighting, takes some hits from like crossbows being fired from, Darrow that are outside of melee range and everything, and eventually says, okay, I take off as well. But important to note at this point is that he used Shield of Faith and I think one or two other spells and some of his lay on hands during this pointless fight. But they escape. And they take a short rest, and they get some hit points back, and they say, okay, like 20, 25 minutes later, we're going to go back in, but we're going to disguise ourselves a bit so we don't immediately get the same reaction, which was fine. And after about an hour of searching, they find an entrance to the Whorlstone Lair by following Droki. And they said it's actually a little bit easily, it looks like it's been made to hide, like moldy boxes are stacked in front of it, and there's rags draped over this opening in the wall. But there's like almost a glowing fog somewhat seeping out of it. So they go in. And I said, okay, so they get into this tunnel, and they go in this massive tunnel, which branches off in 3 different directions, straight ahead, one to the right, one to the left. And, I give them the description. The entire area is suffused with phase res, which is basically like this ancient magical substance that permeates throughout the Underdark and is a callback to the ancient elven civilizations. It's very magically sensitive, and it glows, and it's very noticeable in the tunnels under here. And even though they're in these big echoey caverns, there's a stillness to the sound and to the air, so that there's water dripping and pooling on the floor, but it doesn't echo. The sound is very muted. So they're in these tunnels, and they do some searching for traps. There's no traps, but they notice a patch of yellow mold, and it seems to be covering something of interest. So the Warlock sends his little invisible imp ahead, who touches it, and then when the yellow mold is touched, it's like a classic D&D trope. It emits a cloud of spores that are actually very nasty. They can poison you and actually give you like ongoing poisoned effects, and it's not very nice. But the imp or the fiend that is his guy is immune to poison, so he didn't care. So he scrapes away enough of it to see that underneath there appears to be like a skeletal hand wearing a ring. And the Paladin says, well, I can't see very well, so I pull out my sword again, and I turn it on, and the sunlight comes out. And it specifically says that if yellow mold is exposed to sunlight, it basically just like rots away. So it burns away, and he can see this under the yellow mold. And the Barbarian walks up and takes the hand and says, oh, there's this little silver ring with like an aquamarine gem set in it. And she takes it off and puts it on her character. And I say, okay. And she's like, well, does anything happen? Nope. And it's like, well, can I check if it's magic? And I was like, well, you don't really have a reason to suspect that it's magic. And it would require an arcane check, but like, it's whatever right now. So she's wearing it. And I don't think I've told the characters what it is yet either, so I'm not going to say it here until they find out, because I know that they sometimes watch these videos, especially since one of our party couldn't make it. I'm sure they'll be catching up here. So they find this ring, and then they say, okay, which way do we want to go? And the Barbarian does his survival check to track and says, well, you can tell that small footprints headed off to the left. And, you can peek through and you see that straight ahead it seems to slope downwards. You can hear water. To this area where it seems like Droki may have ran, it actually seems like a bit of a dead end. It's a smaller room. And over to the left is a much larger cavern, and it stinks. It smells awful down there. And so again, the Warlock sends his little imp to fly in and take a look, and he's invisible, right? So he goes in. I say, okay, well, what you can see through your familiar is that there's some kind of strange shrine in the middle of the room. The body, or the floor, is just covered with dismembered body parts, and there's some small figure of a Darrow busying himself on this shrine. You can't see his face, and so they're like, that's weird. And then the Paladin says, okay, I'm going to cast detect fiend, or detect alignment, or something. I can't remember what it's called, but I basically say, yeah, you can sense undead in the next room. And he says, okay. And so the paladin in him is like, well, that's evil and that serves no purpose, and we should destroy that threat. And plus I've got this awesome sword that just hates undead. And the sword is saying like, oh, because remember the sword is sentient and can talk to its owner, and basically says like, oh, we should go and destroy that evil and don't put me back into darkness and righteousness and all this kind of thing. So the paladin's like, yeah, we should go there first before we follow this jokey guy. And the Ken LaFlaunt, the bard, is like, I don't think we should do that. Why should we do that? We're here for one reason, and it's to follow this guy. Why are we going in here? And so the paladin and him get into a bit of an argument, but ultimately the party reluctantly agrees to say, let's go check it out. So they go in and they find out that over this weird shrine in this bloody cave of carnage is Pepito. And if you remember, Pepito was one of the original prisoners who escaped with them, and they found out that he had murdered Prince Darendel in one of the earlier sessions and managed to escape into the night. And so here he is in this cave, and he basically says, oh, it's you guys. I never expected to see you here. But, you've arrived at the perfect time with my shrine complete and my power rising. I think you're ready to accept my truth into your hearts. And at that point, combat starts. And so the characters rolled, the PCs rolled pretty well for initiative, so a couple of them got to go first. But the whole ground is so covered in corpses that the entire cave is treated like difficult terrain, so everyone's movement is halved. So the highest ranking initiatives, I think, were the Paladin, the Barbarian and the Warlock. And the Warlock tried to get in an angle to shoot and didn't roll well enough. The Barbarian can only move half speed, so he dashed to try and get as close to to Pepito as possible. So Pepito took some damage somewhere along the line, but not quite enough to kill him. And so on his first turn, what he does is, as a bonus action, he touches his shrine. And 6 skeletons pop up from the corpses that are basically like he raises 6 skeletons. And the shrine turned into a Flesh Golem, is what it was. He had stitched together a bunch of body parts and made this Flesh Golem. And the Flesh Golem isn't necessarily part of the encounter, but I threw it in there because it would have been just way too easy otherwise. I mean, Pepito, honestly, is just a Darrow. Like, he has a small hit point pool and a small AC, and he can cast a few cantrip spells and wield a crossbow and a short sword. He's not a threat. And 6 skeletons to a party of 4 level 4 characters, again, not that much of a challenge. But I wanted, the players had built up a bit of a hatred toward Pepito, and I didn't want to cheapen the victory. So I said, okay, well, it makes sense that he's been kind of working on, with all these victims, that he's been creating something that for him is representative of his power. So here's this Flesh Golem. So the characters, like, I started to nickname the Barbarian Bard the Bone Crusher, because every turn she would just roll up to a skeleton and basically one-shot it with the Great Axe. So it was kind of funny that these skeletons were just dropping, and the Bard used most of his spell slots to essentially keep Pepito out of the fight through using I can't remember, it's something's hideous laughter, I think, which basically makes him fall prone laughing and unable to do anything but to try and get out of it. And it worked, but the thing was, they didn't know how powerful or what Pepito really was. So they thought, oh, well, he's raised these skeletons, like he must be a caster of power, so we need to keep him out of the fight. So they did, it just wasn't as important as they might have thought that it was. The real issue was the Flesh Golem, because as a golem, he basically is immune to like everything that's not magical unless it's an adamantine weapon, which meant that the only things that could actually hurt him were the Warlock spells and the Paladin Sword. And I told my players right when they started this campaign, I will be running monsters and NPCs and villains according to their intelligence level in terms of aggro. So if you're fighting like a wizard, a wizard is going to target whatever the wizard deems the greatest threat. So there might be a warrior closing in on him to fight, but the wizard might be smart enough to know to take out the healer first, right? But monsters that are just monsters, they're going to go for either whatever is scariest to them or whatever is doing the most damage, and that's what's drawing the most aggro. So the Paladin swung at this thing with its sword and did some decent damage. So the Golem says, okay, that's my target. So he gets 2 slam attacks as it just hammers away with these gross fists and basically took like down the Paladin twice, maybe. I can't remember exactly. But it was a tense fight. They killed Pepito, they killed the skeletons, and eventually, you know, they were able to down the Flesh Golem just before the Warlock got downed, and the Paladin was already downed, and that would have been it, because they would have had no way to effectively hurt the Golem after that. But they did destroy it, and that was the end of the fight, and they got a bunch of XP. And then what was cool from that is, you know, they got to get rid of Pepito, who they hated, and on top of that, there's a little development that happens. Is like this little ghost of a deep gnome that Pepito had murdered basically comes up out of the floor and says like, oh my God, you killed him. Thank you. That guy was such, you know, a douche. You know, like he was terrible and he was evil and he murdered me not too long ago. You know, and you guys, you know, made quick work of him. And the characters question this ghost a little bit, and they find pretty quickly that, you know, he's not a hostile. He's got a friendly disposition to him, or as much as you can be as a ghost that's trapped in the Whorlstone Tunnels. And they question him a little bit, and he says, yeah, like every now and then I see this weird little fellow in a strange hat, you know, run in and out of the caves, and that's Droki. So they have confirmation that, you know, this is a frequent spot for him to come, and that he did probably head off that other direction. So in addition, they say, you know, look, the classic line, it's like, well, you guys seem pretty able-bodied. I was wondering if you could do me just a little favor. And they're like, okay, what? He said, well, you know, the strange magics that have been working here actually caused one of my dismembered hands, because Pepito chopped me up, to basically animate and crawl off somewhere in the tunnels. And on that hand is a very kind of like important to my family signet ring. And if you could just find that ring and bring it to my family in Blingdenstone, that would be much appreciated. It would allow my spirit to finally find rest. And so the player said, like, yeah, okay, I guess we'll keep an eye out for it while we're down here. I said, okay. So that's where we wound up calling it for the night, was after this combat. It sounds like the character's intention is to follow Pepito's trail, but they still have the option of going straight and investigating the water. The cave, the Pepito's lair that they were in, I'm sorry, Droki, I don't know if I said follow Pepito, but in Pepito's lair, it continues on. Like, they can kind of go through that cave and continue on down that tunnel as well. But the Whorlstone Tunnels have lots of interesting things to offer. It'll be interesting to kind of note their adventures while they're in the cave here. So yeah, that's all good and well. I think they had fun. They found some kind of treasure so far. You know, we kind of joked at the end, hey, here was a session where there were both dungeons and dragons. We did it. That's the name of the game. So yeah, that concluded our session of play. And it will be interesting to see what they do next and how they move forward. So as usual, thanks for watching, and I know I wanted to get a Players Pub episode 2 at some point last week, and it just didn't work out for the people I needed to show up. But we're going to be trying to get another one of those in as soon as I can, and I am trying to still pump out some additional videos on Star Wars Legion and a couple other things. This month, at the end of the month on April 28th, is actually International Tabletop Day, so I'll be sure to do some kind of video of that. Our local store will be hosting a big event, as we do every year. That International Tabletop Day has been going. If you are in North Bay and you're watching this, I encourage you to check it out. We do a free pizza lunch, we raffle off free board game prizes, and we have games going right from 10 a.m. all the way to probably 10 p.m. With game masters there to teach you every game that we have available to play. So it's a great time. Definitely come check it out. Always appreciate a subscription to the channel here. If you have comments or questions, love to see them. I'll respond to them if they are questions. But otherwise, thanks you for listening, and we'll catch you next time on DM Journal.